Okay, so we've got four fantastic panelists, and they're all going to speak for about 3 minutes, no more than 3 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to discussion. I've got a few questions that have been sent in by BBC viewers, so I can intersperse your questions with those questions, and we'll run through to around kind of 7:15. So is that okay with everybody? Great. So let's start with these short statements. I did get to a stage in my life when I lost friends I'd had for years, because my children went to state schools, and a lot of my friends who were kind of left-wing sent their children to independent schools, and it wasn't because of that I stopped being their friends. It was because of the unbelievable rationalizations they would provide at dinner parties for why it is they'd chosen to send their children to. It was that I couldn't bear. I'm happy with them going there, it's their choice, but it was the kind of length they went to in order to demonstrate that their particular child had special needs and therefore had to go to the independent school. So I got to the stage of being very sick of people talking about education at dinner parties. So I'm going to invite the panelists to imagine they're at a dinner party, and education has come to the, and is the topic, and then suddenly there's a silence, and everyone turns to them and wants to hear what you think we need to do in education. What do you think is the priority? What do you think is the area for action? What do you think is going on? You've got 3 minutes to impress the dinner party and get the conversation onto a more sane and interesting footing than it already is. So I'm going to introduce people in order, and we're going to start with Toby Young, who's a journalist and contributor to Renegade Pictures' Start Your Own School, the series that you saw a brief clip from before. Toby is a British journalist and the author of How to Lose Friends and Alienate People and The Sound of No Hands Clapping. Today's teaching experience includes working as teaching fellow at Harvard and teaching assistant at Cambridge. Along with other parents, Toby is setting up the West London Free School, which aims to be renowned for academic excellence and ambition in all its students, no matter what their background. Toby, your 3 minutes starts now.
If there's one thing I'd like to change about education in this country, it's for there to be a greater tolerance, a greater appetite for experimentation. What me and the group of parents and teachers that are trying to set up the West London Free School are trying to do could be described as an educational experiment. We want to start a school which has a grammar school curriculum, if you like. Children will only be allowed to do academic subjects. Latin will be mandatory till the age of 14. But we want that curriculum to be accessible to a very broad intake. So we want a mixed range of ability. We want it to be as socially and ethnically diverse as the local area it's serving. Now, people think that's ludicrously ambitious. How can you expect such a diverse, broad intake to access such a challenging curriculum? Well, we think there are various things you can do, not least by making Latin mandatory for Key Stage 3, but we also want to extend the school day. We want to open the school on Saturday mornings. We want to have stretch and support classes for those children who are struggling. And we think it's a worthwhile experiment, and similar schools in America, like the Knowledge is Power schools, have been extremely successful by using very similar methods. One of the ways in which the debate about free schools is usually framed is it's a battle between the haves and the have-nots, between the middle classes and the working classes. But I think that's completely misleading. It's not a battle between the haves and the have-nots, because the have-nots aren't exactly well served by the system we have at the moment. We have a system of educational apartheid in this country. The attainment gap between the state and private sector is growing ever larger each year. Something has to be done to address the historic underachievement of people who are the most vulnerable, people from the lowest income households. I think this is a worthwhile experiment, and my plea would be with the people who have a vested interest in defending the status quo to be a little more open to experimentation. And that means the teaching unions, that means local authorities, to allow 1,000 flowers to bloom so we can find out what works and set about really improving attainment for everybody, but in particular, the most vulnerable. Thanks.
Thank you. Brilliant. You can applaud if you want to. Yeah. I'm doing a kind of clapometer here. All right. It's all right, Toby. Okay, now, Professor Dylan William is Deputy Director of the Institute of Education, a presenter of BBC One's Classroom Experiment. I don't think it's been broadcast yet, but I saw it last week. It's absolutely brilliant. Dylan has taught in urban public schools, directed a large-scale testing program, served a number of roles in university administration, including Dean of a School of Education, and pursued a research program focusing on supporting teachers to develop their use of assessment in support of learning. Dylan.
Thank you. I don't think we realise the scale of the crisis that's confronting us in terms of educational achievement. In the British economy, we are currently shedding 400 no-qualification jobs every single day. Kids are smarter than they've ever been, teaching is better than it's ever been, but the rate at which the economy is getting rid of low-skilled jobs means that we have to raise our game. People look for quick solutions. The KIPP schools in America produce great results for the kids who stay in them, but a lot of kids in this shape up or ship out regime actually end up shipping out. So the net effect of KIPP schools seems to be quite small. The net effect of charter schools in the US has been to lower student achievement because more schools got worse results than got better results. So these big blanket policies appear to be ineffective. Academies do get better results and improve quicker than similar kinds of schools, but they also start from a lower baseline. And when you compare academies with other schools starting from the same point, they improve at the same rate. Specialist schools get better results than non-specialist schools, but they also get more money. And when you control for that, you find that there's no difference at all. It's just the £129 per student per year that makes a difference. So all these big structural changes haven't made a difference. So what does make a difference? Well, some people advocate getting rid of the incompetent teachers. Chris Woodhead reckoned there were 15,000 of them. If there really are that many, I mean, we don't know because it's a continuum. There's not a kind of drop-off where teachers are really bad. But if we could actually get rid of the least effective 15,000 serving teachers, we would raise the average national GCSE score by 1/40th of one grade at GCSE. If every single Teach First teacher is as good as the average Finnish teacher, which they're probably not, but even if they are, then Teach First would produce a national increase in GCSE grades of 1/400th of one grade at GCSE. And my despair is that everybody is pursuing policies that are not likely to produce the effect we need at scale. What we need to do is to help every single teacher in every single classroom, the ones who are already in our schools, do a better job day in, day out. And that means a relentless focus, not on professional development that actually gives teachers new facts, but a focus on professional learning about practice. Changing practice is hard because it's changing habits. And what we're beginning to discover is that we have a lot to learn from people like Weight Watchers because they understand that nobody needs to know what they need to do to lose weight. I mean, basically, it's just eat less and exercise more. Everyone knows that. What's hard is changing habits. We need new models of professional development and new kinds of teacher learning that are relentlessly focused on improving what happens every day in classrooms up and down the country. If we do that, then unprecedented improvements in educational achievement are possible.
Sorry, Toby. You're used to it, though, aren't you? I mean, you built a career out of it. So
Well, it's not unfair that you told them about the clapometer after the clapping.
I'm sure you'll be able to respond later in the conversation. Now, Amanda Blue is series director and producer of the BBC's Big School Lottery series, documenting the experience of children going from primary to secondary school in Birmingham, Europe's biggest education authority. Amanda has been producing and directing a broad range of documentary films for over 10 years, including the award-winning Young Black Farmers for Channel 4, about a group of inner-city black teenagers going to live and work on a Devonshire farm, and Prescott, The Class System and Me for BBC Two. Amanda.
So I'm the non-educational, so I'm a filmmaker, and I'm just going to share my experiences. I spent the last year with children transferring from primary school to secondary school in Birmingham. We followed 8 families, and that was a sort of an early choice I made, because when I was asked by the BBC to make a series of films about sort of the temperature out there and what modern Britain looks like and how education's, faring and how that's affecting, and this whole idea of choice. So we followed children and parents in, September last year choosing, for want of a better word, their secondary schools. And in Birmingham, we also followed the local education authority. So the films are very much trying to kind of reflect how parents choose a school for their child. And in Birmingham, it's very complicated because there's grammar schools still. And my approach was to choose as many families as I could, and for it to still make sense, so that we could reflect a multitude of views, because I didn't think, traditionally in a film like this, you'd often follow 3 kids or 3 parents, and actually I felt like if you did that, you wouldn't be able to say anything very universal about education. So what I think I discovered is that, it's not a huge surprise, but that actually the inequality, I think, is absolutely just begins in the home, and that many children are more prepared. There's a kind of disparity in preparedness for secondary school, and that comes from background, really. And I know that schools can make enormous differences, but, having spent months and months in people's living rooms and watching what happens when kids come home to do their homework, and, some do it to blaring music and others are tutored by their parents to get into grammar school, then there's a kind of lack of information for kids when they're 11, depending upon what their parents are able to access and tell them. And so I don't know what the answer to that is, because I think that's a kind of, how do you get into people's houses when children are young? And if parents have had a very bad experience of education themselves, which is what we found, then that filters down to their children. So, we had kids who were being tutored a lot to get into grammar school, and that actually, what was surprising about that was that, I think politically most people think that's quite negative, the whole tutoring thing, and we found a couple of families who actually, I think the kids thrived under it, and they had the confidence to achieve, and they had the parents, it gave them confidence, the parents' kind of belief in them, and actually, that we saw some awful cases as well where kids felt like they failed at 11, but there were some positives to that, and that's what surprised me, because I always thought that perhaps children, it was cruel and to push them, but I think children sometimes thrive when they're pushed, and it's interesting what Toby's saying about Latin, and certainly more than half of the children I followed would thrive under that kind of interest, I suppose, in them. And that's what I think, what happens in some of the families I followed is there's a lack of interest in their education, and therefore that continues, and I don't know how you change that sort of spiral. But and the local education authority also has a sort of strange role in this, because they operate the system where they say you've got 6 choices, you can go out there and choose any school, and children get taken around at this time of year to lots and lots and lots of different schools, and actually they're interested in who's got the best gym and if the building's new, and they get very heartbroken when actually you write all those 6 schools down, but really the reality is you'll probably get one, and it may not be your first choice. So it was sort of the ramifications of all that, I think, need working out and discussing.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Now, Sir William Atkinson is Executive Head Teacher of Phoenix High School. Sir William has been head at Phoenix High School in Shepherd's Bush since 1995. He's achieved excellent results at Phoenix, overcoming low results and bad behaviour. He was a member of the DFEE Standards Task Force between 1997 and 2001. He also sat on the Home Office Justice Task Force and the Home Office London Youth Crime Reduction Task Force. In January this year, the National College for Leadership of Schools and Children's Services selected Sir William as the National Leader of Education and designated Phoenix High School as a National Support School. So, Sir William, we've had, so far, experimentation and ambition from Toby, we've had changing practice and habits from Dylan, and we've had get the parents engaged from Amanda. So, do you want to add, or do you want to choose?
I don't think I'll choose. I might do some adding to what Dylan said. I've been a frontline practitioner for about 40 years. During that time, I've been a deputy head teacher in 2 separate secondary schools and run 3 secondary schools. In September of this year, my school federated with a neighboring primary school, Canberra Primary School, to found a federation, Phoenix and Canberra. I've also been very lucky that I've spent 10 years or so as a national judge for the Teaching Awards, and as such I was responsible for leadership, judging in the leadership category, which took me to Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, all over England. And in that time, something struck me time and time again. And what struck me was that the best schools often had high-quality teachers who were not only technically competent, but they had a passion for what they were doing, and they saw themselves first and foremost as learners, recognizing that they had the potential to be better themselves. And I also recognized they needed to model those kinds of behaviors for the young people. In my teaching career, I've spent nearly all of it working with youngsters in the most challenging circumstances in schools which are labeled at one time are not failing, underperforming. And what I've come to understand is not only do we need to recruit and retain the very best people and follow almost literally the prescription that Dylan's just outlined, but that's not enough. I've learned to appreciate the central role played by the family of the families who send their children to these schools. If those families' values are not in line with the values of the school, then what you have is a situation where some of those children, significant minority, do not come to school. Or if they come to school, they do not come to school ready to learn. They haven't got the right equipment late for school, or they've not had a proper breakfast or whatever. Or they don't have the space to do the homework that they need to do. What I've come to understand is that we need to get it right in the classroom, as Dylan said, in the schools that I'm talking about. But we also need to develop a proactive policy around family engagement and working with the wider community. Kids spend somewhere in the region of 15 or 17% of their time in school. For our kids, if we were just to stop at 15, 17%, we wouldn't make the progress that those youngsters need. So we have to extend that to 20 or 25% by engaging with the family. Very difficult to do that, especially where we've already been told the families have failed at school or felt rejected by school. So what we have to do is proactively go out to the community with outreach workers in order to engage and find links so we can bring those parents back into the school. So in going forward with these schools in the most challenging areas, absolutely recruit, retain, and train the very best teachers. And they need to be in those schools for a period of time because those kids need consistency, continuity. But alongside that, we've got to work overtime to engage and work with the parents, to grow the ambition, to grow the esteem that is so essential if the young people are going to be infected by what we're trying to do with them in school.
Great, thank you. Great. Well, I think kind of Dylan and Sir William won that, but that may just be because people like teachers. Or ex-teachers. So it may be the kind of respect for professionals. Okay, we're going to open it up now. Just a couple of things, just to play around your mind as you're thinking about the question you want to ask or the point you want to make or a bit of good practice that you want to share. It seems that every week we have another answer, and we were told over the weekend, of course, that the answer to all these problems is to change, to reduce the length of summer holidays. Which, by the way, the RSA does in its academy, which has 5-term years, and we have shorter summer holidays. So it's kind of interesting that there's so much educational research, but yet there's so little consensus about what is going to actually improve things. The other thing I thought I'd just chuck in, because I think it's fascinating, and I'll come to Toby before I open it up, is, as I understand it, the highest performing social group in education last year was Chinese girls on free school meals, who actually did better than Chinese girls who weren't on free school meals. But Chinese girls on free school meals, the highest performing group of children anywhere in the school system, which is kind of quite interesting. Anyway.
I was just going to say that one of these suggestions that Frank Field made, along with shortening summer holidays, was to introduce GCSEs in parenting, which did seem to chime with what Sir William was saying, and I wondered what his view of that was.
Is this GCSEs for parents or for schools, for children when they become parents?
It wasn't very clear, but I think the idea is that you could do a GCSE age 16 in parenting.
Yeah.
I think there's far too much testing in the system, and the idea of putting parents through that. Having said that, a number of our parents through our family learning part of our school do undertake GCSE qualifications, and they don't actually attend classes at the moment. There's all this child protection stuff, which is very difficult to get around. But they do sit in parallel classrooms, and they are coming back to school to maybe make up for some of what they didn't get first time round. So working with parents getting qualification, which really impacts on their self-esteem. And what is great is when the kids see that their parents are also learning, that underlines and values the whole process of learning. And many of these people, young people I'm talking about, come from families where the parents, extended family, never went beyond secondary education. Yeah, the idea of being post-16 in education is totally alien to them. So we're having to grow a culture, grow a set of expectations, sets of ambitions, and certainly getting parents into school, learning alongside their kids or in adjoining rooms. I think it's a jolly good idea.
Dylan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, one of the scariest statistics I've ever seen is that a kid who in a working class household is at the top 10% of cognitive development at the age of 22 months will have been overtaken by the age of 7 by a kid from a middle class household who started out in the bottom 10% of cognitive development. And nobody's sure entirely what it is, but it seems to be the use of language in the household. If you are a kid in a middle class household, by the time you're 36 months old, you will have had addressed to you by an adult 25 million more words than if you're in a family or on welfare benefits. And so if we are serious about intervening in that, we have to do something about the quality of language in the home, as well as all the other things that Sir William has actually outlined. And for me, the really, picking up Toby's point about education research, what we don't do in education research is two things. One is look at cost-benefit analyses. So yes, people can actually talk about the idea like getting a shorter summer holiday, but let's work out how much it would cost to do that, and let's work out how much extra student achievement we would get. We don't do that often enough, and the second thing is we don't think enough about scalability. Will this work across 400,000 classrooms in the UK? There's no point in changing 20 to 25,000 classrooms. We have to be doing it for 400,000 classrooms. So cost benefit and scalability, that's the way we're going to actually make a dent in this problem.
Yeah. Can I just say, just so I piggyback on that, Matthew. Sorry, am I interrupting?
No, I know, and even if you were, I would defer to you.
I just think that last one is so important. I mean, we are bombarded with these panaceas, these boutique solutions, and quite frankly, they're not terribly important in the great scheme of things. What you need are things which are, as Dylan just said, which are scalable. We need to impact the vast majority of schools, the vast majority of teachers, and the vast majority of young people and their parents. So when I'm looking for solutions, when I'm looking for ways forward, I'm not looking for something that's sexy and quite interesting over there, which will work in a particular set of circumstances during a particular time when somebody's bouncy, lively, charismatic in place. What happens the next year, the year after? What happens across the piece? And I'm one who's interested very much in that 40 or 50% of young people who are not getting a great deal out of school as things stand at the moment. So the challenge for me, what are we going to do for this bottom 30 or 40% of young people? And we can't do it with boutique solutions.
Okay. Perhaps we can do it with thousands and thousands of boutique solutions. Who knows? Right. Let's take. There's a woman up there. No, back.
Thanks.
Tell us who you are.
My name's Sally Millard. I'm from the Institute of Ideas Parents Forum. I'm quite interested how quickly discussion about schooling and education descends into an attack on parents and a so-called parenting deficit. And it really strikes me as problematic. I mean, I thought the BBC series was, that I've watched the two programmes, and I thought they were very interesting. And what they showed to me was that parents have aspirations for their children. That is why parents are so concerned about the school that their children go to. And you can see this kind of choice, or the illusion of choice, really how that leads to a great deal of anxiety on the part of parents, because they want what's best. But I think we're living in a world now where there's no kind of broader sense of what education really is. What is the education that we should all be aspiring to for all of our children? And so the choices that you actually get to make are false choices, and most of them parents end up disappointed and very anxious. But I think if you take the argument that's being made here to its logical conclusion, that there's all these failing parents, parents who aren't aspirational enough for their children, who aren't educated enough in the home, therefore we have to educate the parents. I mean, really, the logical conclusion of that is that you should move the teacher into the home to live with the parent and the child. And I think we have to you know, we have to really shift the discussion back, as far as I'm concerned, into what happens with education. And on Toby Young, I think it's quite, he does present quite an aspirational view in contrast. And I'd just like to ask him the question, how do you combat what I would call the tyranny of relevance in the way that you approach that, you're kind of giving Latin to everyone? Because it strikes me that part of this making everyone the lowest better ends up being actually about lowering the standards to the lowest common denominator rather than raising it up under the name of relevance to those children.
Okay, it's always nice to hear the Institute of Ideas perspective on these things. I don't think actually anybody, I know it doesn't quite fit the account that you want to give, but I don't think anybody talked about aspirations as being the issue. I think Dylan talked about very specific and concrete evidence about use of language, and I think, so anyway, we'll bring the panel in. But Toby, you asked a very specific question, which is, how are you going to overcome the alleged tyranny of relevance?
Well, we very much resist any argument that a subject shouldn't be included in the curriculum we're proposing on the grounds that it isn't relevant. I don't think anyone in my group, and it consists of about half teachers, half parents, thinks that that should be the standard by which you judge whether or not a subject should be included in the curriculum. I think we all believe that the purpose of a school is not to just reflect back to children what they already know and produce things which are relevant to them, but to try and broaden their minds, try and introduce them to ideas and bits of knowledge that they wouldn't normally encounter in their everyday lives, because, let's face it, they're unlikely to be confronted with it later on. It's really that's a tiny window in which I think you really have a responsibility to impart a core body of knowledge, not because it's relevant to any specific thing in their lives, but because it will enrich the whole of their lives. It will make their lives much more meaningful. That's the effect, the transformative effect of a good education, a classical liberal education.
Amanda, I'm going to bring you in on this parental point in a second, but Toby, how do you is your aspiration to develop a different model, which is, to use the jargon word, scalable, or is it simply that your school will be great, and you kind of recognise that no other school doing what you're doing will have, for example, your kind of commitment to it? So is it a solution for this school, and you think every school needs to develop its own solution, or do you think it's something which you'd like to see 100 schools doing if it succeeded?
Well, I think there's certainly bits of the free school model that I think are scalable. We've certainly rather self-consciously set about trying to set up our school in such a way that the process is scalable. But then I also think that schools should enjoy a good deal of autonomy. And we don't necessarily think that every school should adopt our particular curriculum. I think there should be much more freedom. We want to see more and more flowers blooming. But I think the actual process needs to be scalable. And one of the reasons I allowed the BBC to film and record the work of our group is in the hope of showing to other parents and other groups of teachers all around the country exactly how to do this.
Amanda, do you want to respond to this Institute of Ideas argument, which is that we're pathologizing parents?
Sorry, I should have talked more about the actual reason we chose the families we did, and that was to really show that actually academics for lots of parents aren't everything, and actually secondary school is also about your child being happy and learning to mix with other kids. And, for some parents, it's not that they don't have aspirations for their children academically. I found that often that wasn't at the forefront, and what I really didn't want to make was 3 films that were about the middle class angst, which I suspected was not the true picture out there, and it was just a kind of what we get fed by the Daily Mail and all the other papers that kind of, it's good news story. So really, I mean, the families are very different. If you've watched them, you've seen, and I chose them really specifically for those reasons, to be able to show that some parents, they don't read Ofsted reports and they don't read league tables. They just want to go to their kids to go to a school where they're safe, where they're going to have good friends, where they're going to fit in, where they're going to learn how to kind of function in society. And of course, get an education in the meantime, but it's not the top priority. And for some families, it's hugely at the top of the agenda. And so I hope the series did that, because that was a really conscious choice. So I suppose what I found, what I came away from feeling sad about is that I did see children that could probably do better, and actually their whole circumstances, life circumstances, which are very complicated, that will come into play as much as education will. There's nothing we can do about that. And I suppose just on a human level, that kind of always, touches you. But I really, the little boy who's the only white boy in his all Asian area, that little boy just wants to no longer be the only white boy. And then, they don't want to go to an all-white school. They want to go to a completely mixed school. But he was all of a sudden at 11 starting to feel like he didn't fit in and getting bullied and, etc. So I think I sort of didn't touch on the fact that was the reason. And I think you've got to really look beyond just the academics. And the kids don't. The kids are, they care about getting a locker key and if the dinners are going to be yummy and then the other things. And that's all the joy of the magical way of how children perceive. And what was also very interesting is parents' perceptions of schools just feed directly into the kids, obviously. And we had children, in fact, a couple we didn't use in the series in the end, who, they were inevitably going to get into their 6th choice school. And they'd been told by their parents, if you go to that school at the end of the road we don't want you to go to, you're not going to do well. And, 11-year-olds kind of carrying that and getting that, that's where kind of, I don't know, the parental role, everyone's angst has got to be somehow managed because you may not get the school you want, but it may not end up being the worst thing. They may make great friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
I'm not going to bring everyone from the panel in on every question, otherwise we won't get through enough questions. But Dylan, just very briefly, parental issue?
Well, I've never met a parent who wasn't really concerned about helping their kid do the best they can at school. What we've got is a school system that suits the needs of middle-class parents, so they actually end up owning the selection process. Fortunately, it doesn't matter, because work by Rebecca Allen and Simon Burgess published last week showed that if you got the best school for your kid, as opposed to the average school in your choice area, the impact on your kid's GCSEs would be 3 grades, 1 extra grade in 3 subjects. So instead of getting 8 Ds, if you get the best school for your kid, it's 5 Ds and 3 Cs. And if you look at a benchmark threshold like 5 A stars to Cs, the difference between the average school and the best school is 0 for 90% of kids. So fortunately, it doesn't matter very much which school you go to. And coming back to my earlier point, but it matters which classrooms you're in that school. And I just want to echo something that Toby said. I think we are losing sight of the importance of the knowledge curriculum. I think I take a lot of guidance from E.D. Hirsch here. The problem is that we've actually lost sight of the importance of knowledge, of a shared body of knowledge in our curriculum. And I think we need to go back to that and establish a kind of corpus, an agreed core curriculum, partly for nation building, but partly also for enabling public discourse to take some kind of sensible form in the public sphere, rather than actually pretending that all kinds of knowledge are equally valuable, which they're not.
Okay, that opens up a whole other area. But what I'm going to do is take 3 or 4 now. So I'll take the gentleman here, and then if you pass the microphone to the person immediately behind you and you've asked, that's great. And panel, you'll just have to kind of pick out of these questions the points you respond to. Yeah.
Hi, my name's...
Yeah, it's working.
Hi, my name's Jez Kay. I run a business called Now House. I'm a filmmaker and a TV maker, independent filmmaker and TV maker. Made a documentary sort of interview series called The Chair, and Toby was on it. And in fact, recently someone called Stuart Townsend was on it. And Stuart runs a school called, both Stuart and Toby, I have to say, share something which is seems to be essential when setting up kind of different types of school. And that is passion and enthusiasm, and what I might call routes to inspiration. And for example, this guy Stuart set up something called the Alternative School, which is up in Manchester, which is a slightly different kind of school from the ones we're talking about, because it's a school which takes kids between the ages of 14 and 16 who have been excluded from other schools, and then basically re-engages them with the system, the mainstream system, and puts them back into education when they're 16 and older. And quite a lot of them go to university. And they've got their first Ofsted inspection. They've been going 2 years, and there are 3 schools, and there's going to be more. And my question really for Professor William and Sir William, 2 Williams, is do you think you can learn from that kind of thing? Because at the alternative school, what they do is they let the kids inspire the teachers, and the teachers inspire the kids. And it's as simple as that, because they have absolutely nothing. You can't discipline them because they have nothing. So you let them choose, and they choose, and you let them be inspired, and they're inspired. What do you think you can learn from that kind of off the scale? because these guys are no longer taken into account. At 14, they're on the streets, they're drinking, they're smoking, whatever it is, and schools like the alternative school bring them back in. What do you guys think you can learn and other bodies can learn from schools like the alternative school?
Do you want to pass the microphone behind you?
Hello, Hugh Dames is my name. I used to work with the Scottish Executive when it was building up for its large school building program, and then worked for a think tank called Schoolworks, which was funded by the DFES at the time to introduce participatory design into the school building program just ahead of BSF. The thing that struck me at the Scottish Executive was researching for an international conference, looking at the different school building programs around Europe, was I came across Austria. And Austria had this really philosophical, as you would imagine, Germanic sort of approach to things, which is what is almost the meaning of life, and how do we actually create and society, and how do we create schools that actually support that. And then when I came down to London and working with schools involving parents, communities in the design of school, what really sort of got me excited was this idea that actually schools being the hubs of their communities, the core of their communities, the heart of their communities, so that it's a place where parents wouldn't feel afraid to come onto the campus, wouldn't feel afraid to actually do extra learning, and you actually going out to engage with hard-to-reach parents and involving them in actually what the school was to be. And what I worry about is, I think with the ending of the Building Schools of the Future program, is that we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we're going to lose some of the stuff of schools being hearts of the communities. I don't know whether that means because there's specific interest groups that can have control of that school. I don't really know enough of where Toby's coming from to actually debate the pros and negatives of bridging social capital or whatever, but I do worry that we're going to lose a lot of learning from the stuff that's gone before. We didn't start from a strong philosophical base, but things were actually moving forward in a really exciting way.
Okay, thank you. There's a lady at the end of the row there. Well, there's two. In fact, there's two women at the end of the row, so we'll have both of them. And then I'll bring the panel. So, there we are.
Hi, I'm Goldsworthy. I'm an education consultant based in Wales, working mainly in primary science. The point I just wanted to make was that I think we all know that two teachers can have exactly the same curriculum, they can have exactly the same class, they could have the same learning objectives, but what actually happens in the lesson could be entirely different. And it's that interaction between teachers and the children in the class that is so vitally important, which is where a lot of Dylan's work is situated. And that's the bit that we need to be focusing on more than tinkering around the edge with the curriculum and such like.
Okay, do you want to pass the mic back to? Great, thank you.
Shirley Laws, Institute of Ideas Education Forum. First of all, can I just make a bit of a comment about the film with the boys on, and where
Can
were
you
the
make
girls?
it brief? Because we have
I
heard
will
from the
make
Institute
it
of
brief.
Ideas already.
Just
Thank
a
you.
question about where were the girls and what were they doing and were they doing as exciting things. But I just wanted to make a real, just to raise a question, because we are supposed to be asking the right questions about free schools. And while I think the whole idea, I absolutely agree about the idea of experimentation and the very attractiveness of going off and setting up some schools that are trying out to do something new. But aren't we at the same time, if you're looking at that, abandoning the idea that there is any universal project of education, and that actually the logic of the local means that children in one area may end up getting quite an inferior education if we think about what education might be, that already we can see, you know, what's being rolled out about vocational education. So it could end up that kids in Hackney end up with a purely straightforward skills education because that is what's deemed good for them, while you get other young people in Cambridge or Reading who are getting something quite different. So I think perhaps one of the questions we actually really need to get back to quite seriously is, what is education for? And is there something universal about what we might be aspiring to for young people?
Okay, so we've got questions about passion, we've got questions about schools as the kind of heart of the community, and now we're not building any more new schools. Is that going to be a problem? We've had a question about kind of the dynamics of lessons, and we've had a question about the meaning of education, but really we've had a question, that final question was really, I think, I'll start with you, Toby, on that, is if you devolve, if you have more experimentation, if you let people do their own thing, aren't you going to have more unequal outcomes? Aren't you going to have break up the idea of some kind of universal entitlement?
I think certainly part of the opposition to free schools and any sort of diversification of provision within the state sector is that improvements in one area will inevitably lead to people losing out in others. It's a zero-sum game, and you simply can't improve without bringing about an equivalent and equal decline in another part of the system. I don't think that's true. I think that the virtue of experimentation is that we can gradually discover what works and what doesn't. And certainly one of the most common arguments you hear against free schools is that they haven't worked in Sweden, charter schools haven't worked in the United States. It's an experiment which is a proven failure. Why repeat it here? Actually, the social science research is inconclusive. There's an enormous amount of social science evidence on both sides of the debate. But what we do know, and what is certain, is that some independent taxpayer-funded schools in Sweden and some independent taxpayer-funded schools in America are very successful and others aren't. And I suppose the idea is that if we can move forward with some kind of collective will and imagination, we can gradually accumulate more and more knowledge about what works and what doesn't and bring about universal improvements which don't result in people suffering in other parts of the system.
Can I, Amanda, bring you in on this question of schools at the heart of the community? Why is it, do you think, that parents engage in some of the ways that you talked about? They engage in being very kind of worried about the school that their child's going to go to or whatever. But actually, generally speaking, most parents don't engage with, particularly changes from primary to secondary, of course. The parents get very involved in primary schools, but gets to secondary school, and they kind of, a lot of parents kind of zone out from getting involved in the school as an institution, wanting to know what the teaching, what's going on in the school, supporting the school. It becomes highly kind of individualistic, and once they get past the school choice, they kind of stand back.
It's interesting because a lot of the parents were preempting that, and I wouldn't say they wanted that, but they were already mourning the fact that their children were going to secondary school because they wouldn't be at the school gates anymore. And many mums said, you know, I've made such good friends and I have such a community, and they've gone to that school for sort of 6 years or whatever it may be, and they are going to lose that. And often because children now aren't going to the local school, those little communities are being broken up because, you know, one's going to the grammar school and one wants to go to the one further away. And actually, I think they want that, but I don't think they know how to access it. Every mother and every father I knew definitely felt like they were going to be losing something. And perhaps they don't feel like in the primary school they have access to the head teacher. They know they know the one teacher, whereas they're going to have lots of teachers and the head teacher doesn't feel as accessible. So I think it's something, I definitely think parents want that, and I think schools have got to find a way to enable parents to come in, because none of the parents were wanting to step back at all. I would say, in fact, it was the opposite for all of them.
Great.
Matthew, can I say something on that?
I was going to bring you anyway, but yes, go on. You might want to respond to you ask specifically about what can we learn from these kind of passionate innovators as well.
But if I just take this issue to do with parental involvement, it's simply not my experience that parents of secondary age are not interested and not engaged. My experience is if I've got a young man who's a pain in the left ventricle and I need to speak to that parent, they will come up for my staff. It is also the case that when I want to praise somebody, particularly at a presentation evening, that the parents of those children who are receiving the awards, whatever, they're really pleased to be up. When there's a play, a performance put on, and the parents of the cast, they come up. The other parents might not come, but they come. They're really interested in what's going on. And when we have parents' consultation day, somewhere in the region, it does vary from year group to year group, but on an average, somewhere between about 91 and 93% of the parents come up to find out about how well their sons are doing in school. So they do come up. So they don't stand at the gate in the same way and engage with the teachers in the playground, because they largely don't deliver the children to school. Some do, of course. The children make their own way to school. And also, youngsters do not want their parents within a million miles of them when they're with their mates, yeah? So parents are engaged, they're really interesting, they do come up to find out how well their sons or daughters are doing. Vast majority of them respond to letters that we send home to them. So I just want to say that. As far as passion and commitment is concerned, I think it's vital. I think my kids went to straight middle-class, comprehensive school near where I live, yeah? All of them go to university, or been to university, or doing masters or whatever. Those teachers in that school, all they had to do was to come to school every day and do a good job, yeah? If those teachers came to my school, not only would they have to do a good job, but they would have to convince those young people that it was in their interest to learn, to pay attention, to follow instruction. So it's a higher level of commitment and passion. And if you haven't got that commitment and passion, the children won't acknowledge your presence, yeah? Let alone follow what you want them to do. So passion and commitment's absolutely vital for everybody, but especially when you're dealing with children who are reluctant learners, who do not naturally feel themselves as competent to succeed within a school situation.
Dylan, I want to bring you on this issue of kind of lesson dynamics. Watching your film, it was you see little tiny bits of film, but it looked as though there were teachers who you clearly felt were kind of better and more flexible in responding, and there was one teacher in particular who kind of stood out as being pretty inflexible, and the second things went wrong, started kind of shouting and having a bit of a crisis. In terms of this kind of notion of the dynamics, how important is the way in which the workforce in the school as a whole kind of interact? Generally speaking, and perhaps I'm being unfair here, one gets the sense that teachers feel that it's their job to kind of look after underperforming colleagues and to kind of, to protect them, rather than kind of creating a mood in the school, which is of teachers challenging each other, pushing each other, encouraging experimentation.
I think that underlying all that is this idea that once you've been teaching 4 or 5 years, you're good to go. And so therefore, you either have competent or incompetent teachers. And if you have that prevailing opinion, then when somebody is struggling, it's embarrassing because it means they're no good. In the tougher schools, like the schools that Sir William heads, all the teachers are struggling because it's so hard to motivate those kids. And what you find is a much more supportive dynamic because everybody's trying to do a better job. Average teachers are fine for middle-class, high-achieving kids. But what the research from America and from this country now is beginning to show is that the best teachers make much more of a difference to the lowest performing kids. So what we need, some schools function like talent refineries. They allow talent to float to the top. And if some kids make it and some kids don't, that's fine because their results are good enough. But in the tougher schools, what you find is that teachers function as if these schools are talent factories. We don't get the luxury of choosing our kids. We get the kids we get. What's the best we can do with those? And so coming back to the question about the alternative schools, yes, we can learn a lot from those people, but I wish we didn't have to, because it means that we're dealing with the pathology of the system, because we lost those kids and we have to re-engage them. But what's really interesting in the best teachers in those alternative settings is that they don't actually negotiate the curriculum with the kids. If they do, it's a very one-sided negotiation, because what those teachers have the skill to do is to make the core knowledge curriculum somehow attractive to kids, so they find a way of engaging those kids in the important things. And what I worry about when we talk about kids negotiating their own curriculum is that it's not an informed choice. I don't care if a 7-year-old doesn't want to learn to read. They need to learn to read because choosing not to read at that age is not an informed choice. Maybe by the time they're 15 or 16, they can choose they like some subjects better than others. So for me, it's this idea of informed choice, but then driving that is this idea that all teachers have to accept this idea to continue to improve their practice, basically until they retire or die, as far as I'm concerned. As soon as we have that, I mean, yes, you notice there are differences in teacher competence. That's fine. But the question is what you do about it. And what I'm saying is, let's not worry about how good teachers are or how bad they are. Let's get every single teacher embarked on the path that they're already on in Sir William School, which is that idea of continuous improvement.
Can I ask, why is it that, I'll bring it back in, but why is it, in my experience, schools, head teachers are, not all of them by any means, but often very uncreative about how they use their teaching force, as if every teacher should do the same thing, basically. Every teacher stands in front of a class and teaches. Whereas clearly some teachers could teach 150 and really excite them because they're brilliant kind of rhetoric. There are other teachers who are great in small groups. There are other teachers who are great at producing curriculum materials. Why is it that why is it schools don't use their teaching forces in a more flexible way, which draws on the strengths of different teachers?
Well, I think that our professional development has been focused on actually making each teacher into a clone of every other teacher. And what we need to do is to recognize that all teachers are different, and teachers are outstanding when they actually do the things that really work for them. And each teacher becomes brilliant in their own way. The danger is that becomes idiosyncratic and self-indulgent. So you need some kind of framework within which to keep that focus on the things that are going to be of benefit to the students, because otherwise you do get some self-indulgent behavior. And the other thing is, the problem with letting 1,000 flowers bloom is you better be ready for 900 weeds. So I think that the research does have a role to play here, and what the American experience of charter schools, Toby's absolutely right. Some charter schools are terrible, and some charter schools are brilliant, but we need to get a better handle on which ones are going to be good before we let them set up, because the price of failure is too great for the kids who actually end up in those schools. And once the school starts failing, it's very, very difficult to get the kids out of there because parents are invested. Parents will actually defend a failing school just because they've made an investment in that school and they think it's okay for their kids. So I think we have to think very carefully about having high barriers for entry, but then allowing more experimentation, as Toby suggests.
Okay, yeah, go on, Toby, very quickly.
Well, to me, I wholeheartedly agree with everything Professor Williams just said. And to me, it almost sounds like an argument for allowing the greater involvement of for-profit companies in education, because one of the things the commercial sector is pretty good at is professional development, performance management. Do you think that actually one experiment which is worthwhile would be allowing for-profit companies to set up taxpayer-funded schools?
I'd be interested, provided we can actually have a proper evaluation of their success. Don't forget that we already tolerate people making profit out of providing school dinners. We allow people to make profit out of publishing school textbooks. So it seems to me we need a better debate about who is and who is not allowed to make a profit out of education. And I would be interested in exploring performance guarantees. So these people don't make any money unless they make things better. But then, if they make things better, then it's a win-win situation for the kids and for the profit makers.
I agree with that, although in any system in which you pay people by performance, the private sector, you will always get cream skimming, which could make the selection issues worse. It's always an absolute universal rule.
Provided you get the outcome measures right, that's not a problem.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to make myself very unpopular now by taking the final 6 hands. I've got a cluster of 3 gentlemen down here, so we'll take those 3. Be brief if you can.
I can, but you noted the opening of the can of worms of the knowledge curriculum, and this is probably at 7 o'clock is not the moment to raise it, but I wanted to challenge Dylan to say, what are the holes in the knowledge curriculum? I think it's a slight myth that there's no knowledge being taught in schools. I think there's a hell of a lot of knowledge being taught in schools. And follow it up and ask Toby, what is it that he believes that the knowledge and skills that children will need in the next 50 years, is that necessarily the same knowledge and skills that were taught in the first 50 years of the last century?
Okay, 2 good questions. Yep. No. Oh, yes, you.
We've seen over the...
Tell us your name, by the way. Sorry.
Roy Terry. Right. We've seen over the last decades the shift of initial teacher training into an essentially school-based system, which for the individual person training to be a teacher is an absolute and complete lottery. It depends entirely on the standards within the school and the classrooms in which they're based. We've also, because of devolution of funding down to individual head teachers, seen access to professional development become equally a lottery. With that system, how do we actually raise standards across the board?
Do you want to pass it back to Graham?
Graham Lane, I used to be a chair of Education Committee. I'd just like to, in the free schools business, why do you think we're offering something different that was going on already in many of our schools throughout the country? The idea that teachers don't experiment now and there's not individual initiatives going on in all sorts of ways, it just isn't true. What are you going to offer different to very successful schools who've been very successful in teaching different children what they need to know and what they ought to know, and are places where lots of different children, I'm talking about black, white, not middle-class schools, in fact do extremely well. We're a successful education country, but we've done that because in the past teachers have experimented and found the best ways to teach and to learn.
Okay, I'm going to take the gentleman in the back there, then I'm going to take two people from an interesting set, which is women who aren't from the Institute of Ideas. So if you belong to both those two circles, then I'm taking two of you for the last people. Right.
Kevin, comprehensive teacher, IOI Education Forum. Dylan, you came to my school to talk about assessment for learning a couple of years ago, and I have a lot of time for everything you write. But why is it that when some of the ideas that you talk about reach the school and the class observation sheet, that what you have is the dominance of process over content? And that's why I'm interested about what you said about knowledge, because somewhere along the line that still gets missed out. And I wonder, do you ever feel that perhaps you might be slightly guilty of that process happening yourself?
Okay, right. Yes, there's a hand up there.
Thank you. Abigail Moss from the National Literacy Trust. And I just wanted to offer an alternative and perhaps a helpful narrative around what we were talking about earlier. There is research that shows that if you are reading a range of materials independently by the age of 12, that rules out any disadvantage that you may have from your socio-economic background, which goes back to what Amanda was saying about the importance of actually having interventions or support or something, especially in the early years within the home, especially taking into account the statistic that 1 in 6 adults in the country have low literacy levels themselves and therefore are much less likely to demonstrate the attitudes, behaviours in the home which will help that child to be reading independently by the age of 12. So I just want to propose a couple of potential solutions, which in fact in terms of case studies are things that we are working on. One is in terms of having people go into the home, working with local authorities and increasingly with members of communities who are trusted within communities to work within the home, which takes quite a strategic approach to each agency that has a relationship with those homes, knowing how to signpost and knowing how to model those behaviours themselves. And that's a programme that we've been doing for some time and which we wish to carry on doing in response to the issue that was raised. And the other piece of work that we're looking at is the importance of talk and the issues that were raised by Professor William earlier, and looking at how teachers can integrate talk alongside the other literacy disciplines in the ways that they are teaching, but we also in the future want to look at how they can do that and link it to how they assess learning, particularly formative assessment, but also linked to summative assessment. And I suppose my question there is what is the response to the importance of talk in the classroom, and what is the response to a multi-agency approach to intervention in the early years within the home?
Thank you. And then, yes, I'm taking this one right here in the middle. Right, absolutely in the middle. The hardest place to reach in the entire room. There. Blue. Oh, blue. Cardigan. Oh, what? Ah. Oh. It's a complete breakdown.
That's all we can say now.
Hi,
Yeah.
my name's Anna Wexler. I'm a secondary English teacher. I was just wondering, we've been talking a lot about good schools and schools that aren't so good today, but we don't seem to have ever defined exactly what we mean by a good school. So I was just wondering if we could hear the panel's views of what makes a good school, what perhaps we're aiming to do, and if it's just about grades or whether there's more to it than that.
That's such a brilliant question to end with, isn't it? I mean, I know there's lots of other questions, but such a kind of, oh, no, but hang on, no, fine. So,
Two of the things that make this country different from many others is that we have a very unequal society, and the gap between the rich and the poor is even greater. That is something we have to address. Secondly, most other countries provide a universal early years education up to 6, and the first 6 years are the years when children develop a good disposition towards learning. So I'd like to know what the panel think about the kind of education, early education we offer here. And thirdly, do the panel agree that we should end the pernicious system of selection which exists in this country, and which was evidenced in the film that you showed in Birmingham? If we ended that and had a system of comprehensive education across the board, as we have in primary schools, would that not be a fairer system?
Right, panel, you've kind of got every single question under the sun, and you've got, about 2 minutes to respond. So I'm going to ask you to if you just pick out a couple of things, I will say on your behalf. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't like to answer every question, but you kind of know we haven't got very long to go. So I'm going to start with you, Sir William. Do you want to kind of pick out from those questions?
Yeah, I'll take the staff development issue. The question is, from what I can recall, is given the fact that so much of this resources are passed down to head teachers, you end up in a situation where you may or may not get that support that you need. Clearly, head teachers are minded to provide the best standard of education they can for their young people. And a very important component of that is ensuring that your teachers are good at what they're doing. And part of being good at what you're doing is that you're constantly upskilling yourself. You're not maintaining the position that you had at a point in which you entered, but you're constantly reviewing your practice. You are looking for ways in which you can improve. And some of that improvement comes through dialoguing with colleagues within the institution, but very often it's a result of bringing somebody from outside, or indeed visiting organization outside the school in order to get that development. But we recognize that significantly it's about teachers together, meeting together, reflecting, often with an outside coach, in terms of their practice and how that can be improved. And if for no other reason, I think schools are minded to spend well in terms of staff development because of enlightened self-interest. If they don't, they will get into trouble because their kids won't do as well, and they will be challenged by parents and other stakeholders about that performance. We also recognize now that schools need to be learning institutions, and implicit in that is the fact that we're all looking at new ways of garnering knowledge and applying that knowledge irrespective of where you are. I think the idea of innovation can only take place in certain situations is not one that I'm familiar with. I know many schools, mine included, which spends a great deal of time reflecting on this practice, looking at new initiative, looking at what works outside of the institution, what goes on elsewhere. For example, in my school, we recognize that what we do in the classroom is vital, but also the things that go on outside of the classroom, learning beyond the classroom. So, for example, if you came to my school, you're interested in rowing, there's a chance that you could do rowing. There's a chance that we've got a two-person driving range in my school. Yeah, you can also do fencing. And we actually collaborate with a private school down the road to do Latin for a small number of kids who actually want to do that. So there's a tremendous amount of experimentation, pushing the boundaries in what you may call ordinary comprehensive up and down the country. It is not a monolithic picture.
Okay, great. Toby, can I just put you on? I mean, I'm going to bring everybody in, but I'll start off with and respond to any other points. But why didn't you just take your desire for innovation to the local comprehensive and say to them, I want to work with you so that you can do better stuff? Why was it you had to create your own school?
Well, we did initially engage with our local authority and told them about some of our ideas, and incredibly, they weren't particularly receptive. You asked what our school wants to do differently. I don't think any school in the country, any non-selective school, makes Latin mandatory throughout Key Stage 3. Professor William talked about the problem with giving children too many options when they don't actually know what's in their best interest to study. We're not going to give children any options at the beginning of Key Stage 4 at our school. Every child will be expected to do 8 academic GCSEs or IGCSEs. And you asked about the kind of knowledge that we intend to transmit, I think someone else asked, and whether it would be any different to the kind of knowledge that was transmitted 50 years ago. No, I don't think it is. I think the underlying principle, as defined by Matthew Arnold, the best that's been thought and said, remains the same. So in history, for instance, which will be another mandatory subject up to the age of 16 at our school, and again, I don't think that's done, certainly not in very many schools, many non-selective schools, we're not just going to teach the Third Reich, Henry VIII and Martin Luther King. We're going to try and teach a narrative, not only about Britain, but about Europe and the world in general. Just to answer the point the lady over there made about selection, I'm afraid it's a myth to think that there are selective taxpayer-funded schools on the one hand and non-selective schools on the other, and that all non-selective schools have a broadly similar admissions policy, as I'm sure you discovered, Amanda, admissions is an incredibly complex patchwork quilt, and the admissions policies of any two schools are not alike. The problem with what's broadly done in the state sector, in non-selective schools, is that selection by ability has just been replaced by selection by postcode, which is even more unfair and which reinforces social division to an even greater extent than the 11 Plus did. And what we're going to do at our school is have a literal lottery, not a metaphorical one. So the vast majority of places will be awarded in a completely random way with no geographical limit on who can apply. And in that way, we hope to make the school accessible to all families, not just those who can afford to live within the tiny catchment area that the school serves.
So there'll be no limit on you can live on the other side of London?
Well, we're negotiating that with the DFE at the moment, but that's our ideal. It may be that we have to limit it to, say, 4 West London boroughs.
Presumably the lottery numbers will be Latin. quite long tickets. Amanda, is there anything you particularly want to pick up on?
There were two things about the independent literature in the homes. I think that sounds really interesting, and I wonder how effective it is. And I think there's huge numbers of families that would benefit from that. My worry would be, or my question would be, how you access some of those families. And there are, some of the families I was in, the engagement by 11 might be too late because the PlayStation's kicked in, and that is literally the diet of, many, particularly boys. So I think it sounds really brilliant and idealistic, and I hope it works. But I'd love to know how you get access and how early you can get access, because I do think that's crucial. And I think that's just, that is the lottery of what you're born into. And I know schools can change things, but they don't always. So, and my other thing would be about the thing about what makes a good school. I think that's a hugely important thing, because I think we have the parents we met, they often in Birmingham, and it's in London, it's everywhere, have these kind of, because of the gossip, that's a terrible school, I'd never send my child there, X, Y, Z, there's, they get knifed, they get stabbed, all sorts of awful rumours. And actually the school that was most interesting in Birmingham was the school that was the worst school in the country 11 years ago, and is now still a difficult school, still has incredibly challenging kids, but actually was the one I found most impressive and was definitely making a difference, because brought in a brilliant head, it's taken 5 years and it'll go up and up and up. But I just think those reputations are really difficult, and they take a long time to change. So I think it's really important about that kind of going and looking at schools and all that sort of thing, and lots of people won't even look at them. So,
and Dylan, finally, do you want to pick a couple of points?
One of the interesting discourses in this kind of area is the idea that excellence and equity are somehow in tension, that you can have one or the other. And what's really interesting in terms of the international comparisons is that the countries with the highest averages have much more equal outcomes than us. Now, actually, the fact that inequality is rising in this country is a bit of a myth, actually, because it's very difficult to pin it down. It does seem to be more to do with the number of households growing, with the amount of income staying the same. But what we do know is that in the classrooms of the very best teachers, kids from disadvantaged backgrounds learn just as much as those from advantaged backgrounds. And just to address the point about pedagogy and curriculum, actually, I think that the reason that I start the conversation in pedagogy rather than in curriculum is because it's a smarter place to start, because a bad curriculum well taught is always a better experience than a great curriculum badly taught. So for the kids' experience, curriculum is pedagogy. It's how they teach. And I think that's what the Scandinavian countries have done so well. We hear that these kids don't start school until they're 7, and by the time they're 8, they're ahead of us. And we don't believe that because it doesn't sound plausible. But what we don't understand is from 2, they're in play school or some kind of kindergarten school, where all the time those teachers are really cleverly developing talk. So they're developing their talk skills, they're developing a whole range of language skills. So when they come to learn to start reading, they've got the language already, it's just that they're learning how to write it down. So I think we need to think a bit more smartly about our curriculum, and the obvious order in which to teach things may not be the best order. And I think we do need to get this right balance between the 19th century skills and the 21st century skills. We definitely need the 21st century skills, but you also have to apply them in the context of 19th century skills. And that's going to be the art, I think, of taking this debate forward.
Great. Okay, just a couple of things before I ask you to thank the panel. First of all, I think we should just say it's fantastic the BBC have done this series of original programs looking at a whole set of issues. I've seen some of the programs. They really are important programs, so good luck to the BBC. That's what I say. They don't hear that very often, but... No one's asked me what I think, so I'll tell you anyway. One thing I'd like to throw into this equation is that someone who got terrible O-levels, failed their A-levels, and is now the chief executive of the RSA, one of the other things we've got to do is let people develop at different stages, and people may leave at 16 or 17 having failed, but the question is, do you give them a chance at 18, 19, 20 further on? So people develop at different stages depending on what's going on in their lives. So let's just keep giving them opportunities again and again and again in life. I think that's a good principle to apply. But can I ask you all to join me in thanking our fantastic panel tonight, Dylan William, Toby Young, Amanda Blue, and William Atkinson.